Please be advised that any changes you plan to make in diet and lifestyle should be approved by your health care provider. Do not discontinue the use of your prescription medication without his or her approval.
Welcome to God's True Method of Healing.
Hello, and welcome to today's God's True Method of Healing program with our friend and host, Marlene McKinney. She will be explaining some of our health issues using the Bible, science, and information that is readily available today. So please tune in and be blessed. Here's your host, Marlene McKinney.
Hi there, and thank you so much for tuning in to God's True Method of Healing program. This is your friend, Marlene, and I am excited that you have chosen to spend a little time here with us. I'm always happy to be able to hear from my friends and my listeners, and I like to meet you in the stores, and I like to see you by way of church or as we fellowship together. I'm always happy to hear that you are tuning in and that you are learning and benefiting from our programs on a daily basis. Today we are going to look at the protein controversy, and I like to revisit this topic even though we've talked a lot about it in the past, because it's always one that brings lots of interest to the discussions around the dinner table, and as people are able to listen in, they're always able to learn new details about protein and how we should be certain of the types of foods we're eating, protein in particular. Before we get into this segment, let's have a word of prayer. Loving, kind Father in heaven, thank you so much for hearing our prayer. Thank you for your love and your mercy, your grace that you continue to bestow upon us. Now, as we're about to dive into this protein controversy, I ask that you please help us to those foods that you'd have us to eat today in the mighty name of Jesus. And we also ask, Lord, that you'll be with those individuals who are struggling with all kinds of issues, addiction issues, food issues, whatever it may be. Come divinely near to them even now as we share. In Jesus' name, amen. So we have a protein controversy. It says, what words do you associate with protein? So I'm asking you the question. What words do you associate with protein? I was sharing with a friend last night, and she says, people don't even understand what are carbohydrates, what are proteins. And I'm wondering, I don't understand why they don't. But I know most of us associate protein with meat and eggs and cheese and fish. That's what we associate proteins as being. And then there are those of us who feel as though we have to eat these foods in order to get enough found in these foods that we just mentioned is said to be more usable than protein found in plants. Now, my question to you is that true or false? Is it right or wrong? If you do muscle building exercise, do you need more protein? Many myths around about protein, how much you need and the best food sources and all kinds of information. The word protein itself is derived from protos, a Greek word meaning first, since protein is the basic material of all living cells. The human body, for example, contains approximately 65% to 70% water, 25% protein. Protein is made out of nitrogen-containing molecules known as amino acids. Some 25 different amino acids are pieced together in varying combinations to make different kinds of proteins. And of course, proteins definitely help to give the material for our cells and our organs in much the same way that letters make words that combine to form sentences and paragraphs. From the 8 basic amino acids, most of the remaining 17 can be made by our bodies. These 8 are called essential, and they are called essential because the body cannot function without them, although others are semi-essential under certain conditions. Each of the basic 8 deserves its own optimal daily allowance, although these have yet to be set. The balance of these 8 amino acids in the protein of any given food determines its quality or usability. So, the question is always asked, how much protein does one need? Well, am I getting sufficient protein? Estimates for protein requirement vary depending on whom you speak to. This is not so surprising, since there may be widespread biochemical individuality. In some countries, the estimate is as low as 2.5% of total calorie intake. The World Health Organization estimates that we need 4.5% of total calories from protein, while the U.S. National Research Council adds a safety margin and regards 8% as adequate for 95% of the world's population. The World Health Organization builds in a safety margin and recommends about 10% of total calories from protein and about 35 grams of protein a day. The estimate average daily requirement, according to the United Kingdom Department of Health, is 36 grams for women and 44 grams for men. If the quality of protein is high, less needs to be eaten. Now, at the other end of this spectrum are the very high protein diets unwisely recommended for weight loss. These contain about 100 to 200 grams of protein a day, and this is too high. So here again is the question: which foods provide more than 10% of their calories from protein? You may be surprised to learn that virtually every lentil, bean, nut, seed, and grain, and most fruit and vegetables provide more than 10% protein. I said that. That's correct. In soybeans, for example, 54% of the calories come from protein. And soybean is a complete protein. Compared to, say, kidney beans. Kidney beans are 26% protein. Grains vary from 16% for quinoa to 4% for corn. So the quinoa is another food that's high in protein, and it's a grain. Nuts and seeds range from 21% for pumpkin seeds to 12% for cashews. Fruit goes from 16% for lemons down to 1% for apples. Vegetables vary from 49% for spinach to 11% for potatoes. So what this means is that if you are eating enough calories, you are almost certainly getting sufficient protein, unless you are living off high sugar, high fat junk food. So I know this may come to a surprise to many of us, and contradicting all we are taught about protein. Yet the fact of the matter is, to quote a team of Harvard scientists investigating vegetarian diets, it is difficult to obtain a mixed vegetable diet that will produce an appreciable loss of body protein. But surely, the question is, animal protein got to be better than plant protein, isn't it? Well, let's see what we find in our research to help you to understand if one is better than the other. Top of the class would be the soybeans. That's right, because it's a complete protein. Another class topper would be the quinoa. It's spelled Quinoa like quinoa, but it's actually pronounced quinoa. K-E-E-N-W-A, quinoa. And it's a high-protein grain from South America that was a staple food of the Incas and the Aztecs. Most vegetables are relatively low in amino acids, methionine, and lysine. However, beans and lentils are rich in methionine. Soybeans and quinoa are excellent sources of both of these, lysine and methionine. Okay, so if you're looking for a complete protein that's all plant-based, then you can choose from the soybean and you can choose from the quinoa. And quinoa you can get in the regular grocery store. Early theories, such as those first expounded by Frances Moore Lappé in her groundbreaking vegetarian cookbook, Diet for a Small Planet, suggested that vegetable proteins had to be carefully combined with complementary protein in order to match the quality of animal proteins. However, we have since learned that careful combining of plant-based proteins is quite unnecessary. As Lappé says in the revised edition of her book, with a healthy, varied diet, concerns about protein complementarity is not necessary for most of us. In other words, we get sufficient protein from eating a very varied diet of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains. Protein is not a concern for us as a people. Let's look at this particular topic. It says the best protein foods. Listen to the way this is discussed. I think it's quite interesting. The best food to eat for protein are not necessarily those that are highest in protein. The pros and cons of a food, other nutritional constituents have to be taken into account. For example, a piece of and 75% as fat, much of which is saturated fat. Half of the calories in soybeans come from protein, so they are actually a better source of protein than lamb. But their real advantage is that the rest of the calories come from desirable complex carbohydrate. They also contain no saturated fat. This makes foods made from soy ideal, especially for vegetarians. The easiest way to eat soy is in the form of maybe tofu, or you can take the and of course tofu comes in many forms. You have the morinu tofu that we use for desserts or for puddings and pies and what have yous, or for quiche. You can use it for quiches also. You can get the hard tofu. You can get the tofu that's made up that's stored water packed tofu, we call it, that you can use for barbecuing, or you can use it for making lasagnas and scrambled tofu, or you can just do so much with these different varieties of tofu. Soft tofu can be used to give a creamy texture to your soups. Hard tofu, like I said, could be used in stir fries, in your soups, in your stews, your casseroles, and once you add them, it takes on the flavor that you're adding to it. Remember, tofu is tasteless, just like most meats. Meat has some taste, but if you were, say you didn't season that piece of meat, would you be able to tolerate swallowing it? I don't think so, because all you're going to taste is probably some blood and uric acid. Tofu has no taste. When you season your meat, think of, and you want to purchase tofu for the first time, think you're seasoning meat, okay? So season your tofu like you season your meat. Now, I'm not saying if you season it as heavily or whatever, but season it like you season it for taste, because it has no taste. I've met people over and over who say, oh, I bought that, and I opened it up and I bit right into it, and my goodness, it tastes so bad. Of course it does. What did you add to it? You did not bring anything to the table. All you did was you bought a container of tofu, opened it up, and thought you would get the taste that you were looking for based on what you saw on the package. And that will not do. Quinoa has been grown in South America for 5,000 years and has a long-standing reputation as a source of strength for those working at high altitude. Called the mother grain, quinoa, because of its sustaining properties, it contains protein of a better quality than that of meat. Did you get me? Quinoa has a better quality of protein than meat. Although known as a grain, quinoa is technically a seed, and like other seeds, it's rich in essential fats, vitamins, minerals, providing almost 4 times as much calcium as wheat, plus extra iron, B vitamins, and vitamin E. Quinoa is also low in fat. The majority of its oil is polyunsaturated, providing essential fatty acids. Quinoa is about as close to a perfect food as you can get it. Quinoa can be found in many health food stores around town. I've seen it in the local grocery store, and it's an alternative to, say, rice, and you can make quinoa and beans, you can make quinoa and lentils, you can make quinoa and pigeon peas. Just cook it like you would normally cook your rice. And so you rinse it well, then you add 2 parts water to 1 of quinoa. So you have 1 cup of quinoa, 2 cups of rice. And guess what? In 15 minutes, your quinoa is in Manhattan, New York, with a good friend of mine, and she was preparing the quinoa, and it was totally delicious. I went home and introduced it to my friend, my family, my children, and they too fell in love with the quinoa. So that's 1 cup of quinoa to 2 cups of water. Bring it to a boil, cover it, and 15 minutes later, your quinoa will be ready. The average person in our country today eats over 200 pounds of meat each year. 200 pounds. So look at a 200-pound man, or woman for that matter, and that's as much meat as you're eating per year, the average person. This is 60 pounds above the average annual consumption that was in 1950. The traditional view is that meat is good for us, being high in protein and iron. But with our recent research of the BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or mad cow disease scare, this has fueled a growing concern that modern farming methods have gone too far. Meat consumption is going down as more and more people are becoming vegetarians and vegans, or total vegetarians. Leaving moral considerations aside, there are a number of safety issues that give causes for genuine concern. They include the use of antibiotics, growth hormones, and pesticide dips. And we've talked a lot about these over the past year or two that we've been on here on BBN. Professor Richard Lacey, a microbiologist, describes meat as fake meat. Much of what is for sale in supermarkets and butcher shops contain growth hormones, he says, antibiotics, pesticide residues, and at worst could be infected with bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease. Just think of it. What's going to be on your dinner table tonight when you get home? Or if you're already home and you're preparing dinner now, what is it that you're preparing? If you're having a piece of meat, then you may just be having mad cow disease. But definitely you're having hormones, antibiotics, pesticides, okay? And of course, at worst, mad cow disease. The infectious agent thought to be responsible for this mad cow disease is called a prion. We spent a lot of time talking about how the prion latches on to the proteins found in our brain. They convert them and change them or triggering the disease. It is now proven to pass from species to species into human beings. And so I don't know about you, but we ought to be concerned about this. At the time of writing, over 130 people have died of new variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in Great Britain, and the leading theory as to the source of this CJD is that meat that needs to be eaten to get CJD is unknown, as the incubation period in humans. It's not known. Some models have estimated that up to 100,000 people may eventually fall victim to variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the human form of mad cow disease. Though increasingly as time goes by, these estimates are revised downward, and Dr. James Ironside says that he believes that it will be in the hundreds and not the thousands. But of course, it doesn't matter, because we too could be a part of that hundreds that he's proclaiming that may have this human form of mad cow disease. And then what about these hormones? It's a growing concern, a big problem, because most meat today, milk too, is a rich source of hormones, particularly estrogen. Some hormones used widely in the United States are banned in Europe, although there are commercial pressures to rescind the ban. These hormones, including synthetic estradiol and testosterone, are used to force growth rates and increase milk yields. So animals that would normally take months to grow are now growing in much shorter time. These are the same chemicals that are at the center of concern about estrogen dominance, an increasingly common syndrome found in men and women with hormone-related diseases. Prostate and testicular cancer and endometriosis have all been linked to excessive estrogen levels, and most of it is coming from the meats we're eating. Of course, it is not easy to find out what long-term effects the introduction of hormones into our food is having, but Dr. Malcolm Carruthers, a specialist in male hormone-related disease, investigated 1,000 cases of patients exhibiting symptoms of male menopause over 7 years. The most common symptoms are fatigue, depression, loss of libido, testicular atrophy, impotence, and breast enlargement. Of these 1,000 cases, the highest occupational risk group were farmers, the frontline troops in the agrochemical arms race. According to the researcher Dr. Carruthers, he says that for some, the causative agent appeared obvious. They had worked on farms, caponizing chickens or turkeys with estrogen pellets implants to make the birds plumper and more tender. Unfortunately, though, it might be considered poetic justice. They must have taken in large amounts of estrogen, which caused them to become partly caponized themselves. Farmers less directly exposed to hormones and to pesticides, which are also known to interfere with male hormone balance, were also at high risk of male menopause symptoms. Now, if you remember, we did an entire program on male menopause. Antibiotics are widespread used in both humans and animals. Over 500 tons are dished out every year in Britain alone. Unlike human medicines, which are given for a limited period for the treatment of an infection. Antibiotics are routinely added to animal feed to prevent infection and enhance the growth. The aim is higher profits faster. The consumer, however, is being hit with a double whammy. Antibiotics residues are frequently found in samples of meat, fish, and eggs. So are infectious agents that have become resistant to antibiotics. These what we call superbugs. There is growing concern about a strain of dangerous bacterium found in chickens that is resistant to vancomycin, one of the strongest last resort antibiotics. Fortunately, infection with enterococci is rare compared with Salmonella or Campylobacter. With as much as 1,500,000 cases of Salmonella and 2,500,000 cases of Campylobacter infection from meat and eggs per year in Britain alone, it's potentially a huge problem that these common strains of bacteria causing food poisoning are becoming resistant to antibiotics. The World Health Organization has called for a reduction in the use of antibiotics in agriculture because of the risk to human health, while the American Medical Association has warned that the risk to human health from antibiotic resistance developing in microorganisms is one of the major public health threats that will be faced in the 21st century. So, what's on your dinner plate for today or tonight? I pray that you are making wise choices. Remember, we can choose today to eat foods that are rich in protein, but they also have high amounts of vitamins and minerals that will benefit our bodies for the better. Unless you are on a very rich, high junk food diet and lots of sugar, then you should be getting as much protein as you need while you eat fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains. Every food that you eat has protein. We learned that at the onset of our program. Tomorrow we will continue in part 2 about too much meat and how it can be bad for your bones, why a high protein, high fat diet can be dangerous to kidney problems. Is there a problem with fish and milk? What's the hype all about? Well, we're going to look at this and more in our segment on meat, the protein controversy. Part 2 tomorrow. So be sure to tune in as we look at all kinds of ailments that are associated with that of eating a high meat diet. May God bless you on your journey to good health. This is your friend Marlene McKinney. As always, 3 John 2. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. Claim the promises, and mighty things will be accomplished in your life.
To reach Marlene for upcoming cooking classes and seminars, or if you have been blessed by her ministry and would like to give her a love offering to help to further the ministry, please call her at 676-9464. That's 676-9464. You can Facebook her as Marlene McKinney, or you can visit her website at mckinneysoven.com.